because we don't need these temp keys anymore. Let's go ahead and look at our green screen. And we can see here that there's some wrinkles in it, a little bit of coloration that's happening. And so I don't think I want to use key light for this. I want to use something that will kind of tackle these color variations a little bit more accurately. And thankfully, we already know how to do that with our IBK color stack. So let's go ahead. We touched on this in week 1. And the beginning of this is probably going to be very similar. We know how all of this works. We're going to go ahead, set the size to 1, and let's start adjusting our darks so that we get our green in here. Just try to get the most green possible and the smallest amount of other colors. And then in our lights, we can see we still have some blues that are left over here. And so we can just get rid of those by upping our blues. All right, something like that looks pretty good. And again, we'll drop our stack down maybe to 8. And we want to just erode in until all of that color contamination is gone. Let's keep going. Notice this a little bit of contamination there. I don't think so. That looks like it's mostly just coming from the smearing on the green screen. So I think this looks pretty good. And we know what to do next. We're going to make our IBK gizmo. And we'll just pipe it in right here. We'll change this to green. And there we go. Now we have our edge key set up and ready to roll. And we'll notice if we take a look at this, we don't have a solid core. And last week what we did is we made a key light to get that core. What we're going to do this week instead is we're actually just going to use this same IBK gizmo to generate our core key. So let's go ahead and make a grade node down here. And so what we want to do is grade our alpha channel and give ourselves a nice core mat. So what we can do is we'll change this to alpha, and we're going to want to make sure our black clamp and white clamp is on, because otherwise our alpha could go past 0 and 1, and you don't want to have an alpha channel of 2 that's going to start to break things. If we turn this off, we can see in our sampler that we're at about 2.4, so we'll just clamp this so it stays at 1. And so we just want to manipulate this so we have a clear black and white mask here. And we're going to go ahead, make an erode, change this to alpha. Let's just choke this in a little bit because we want our core to smoothly blend over our edge. And we'll blur this one out. How far did we go? 7. So we'll do maybe 5. And let's just blur the alpha here. All right. Now we just have a little bit of a softer edge. And what we can do, I think we can use this exact same D-spill that we have right here. And we'll make a merge. And we're just going to mask our D-spill right here. So we'll set this to mask. And now we're using the exact same D-spill as our roto. And keeping that color consistent is very, very important. Alrighty. And then what we can do is merge this over the rest of our key. And now we have used our IBK gizmo to make a core key. Very common with tricky green screens to do this little technique right here. Now we have that just filled in. The original brightness is restored. And something I think I want to do here, let's look at this over our background. Let's also compare it to the original. And we'll just A-B right here. We can see our little lens breathing, squeezing this down a little bit. I think we're getting rid of a little bit too much green. This jacket feels kind of like a funky color. And let's go into our D-spill amount, and we'll just take this down. Maybe to like 0.6, just to keep a little bit more of that original color. Because if we A-B, we can just see this feels a little bit more natural. All right, so we have the basis of our key down. And we have a similar issue to last week. Thankfully, we know how to fix this kind of darkening of the edge. So we can just copy and paste this, pipe it in here. We're just going to turn our screen subtraction off so this stays nice and bright. And we can dissolve between the two of these. Alrighty, let's go ahead and take a look really quick. And let's just set this to maybe 0.5 to start with. And that's made our edge much brighter. But just like last week, we have this little bit of brightness happening, a little bit of green. So we can just copy and paste this despill here. That'll get rid of the green, but not necessarily the brightness. And so you'll see there's a lot of similarities between the shot and last week as far as the key goes, and that kind of makes sense. It's a similarly colored green screen. And so what we can do to fix this little brightness, we can pipe in our background, and we can just use the background luminance. That'll just kind of darken that off for us a little bit. And so as we adjust our dissolve right here, you can see we can't quite get rid of that bright edge without really kind of darkening the jacket. And so that's a little bit of a problem, and there's a few different ways we could try to fix this. I think what I'm going to do here, if we go into our blue-green weight, if you just pump that up, you'll see that we're just kind of bringing back some of that interior brightness, and that is what I'm after. I think I'll just put this despill after our dissolve, because that is going to bring back a little bit of green everywhere. And I think we'll kind of stick with that. And so it does look like the pants down here need a little bit of work. Let's take a look at those. That is coming from our luma key right here. And we can see how blurry this is in the plate compared to what we have right here. And so we can just blur this luma key out a little bit. Maybe we'll do like 10 pixels. That might be too much. Let's look at our mask right here. All right, so this has both helped and hurt a little bit. It's looking better, but we can still see we have a lot of contamination down here. And so I think for our legs, what we can do is we can just use a little color smear, try to make sure that that works well. Give ourselves some room. And let's see, it looks like part of this is also coming from our key. So maybe the color smear instead we can put by these lens distortions. And that'll just kind of help all of these really dark areas right here. So let's play with this. We'll try to get it to look a little bit more accurate. Eat in, see if checking on our use edge detect works. You just kind of have to play around with your color smear to make sure that everything is functioning as expected. And it looks like when we do our final background adjustments, we'll probably need to lift the blacks a little bit, but that's all right for right now. And we can see on the lower half of the frame, I think this is doing a pretty nice job. If I check on edge detect method, just adds a little bit too much brightness in the bottom here. And so I feel like that is looking much, much better. I think I want to try to limit that just to this bottom section of frame. So we can grab this same transform match move, pipe it into the omit, and we'll just make a mask. And what I'm going to do here is probably just invert this. So we'll grab this, throw a nice invert down, and now we're only affecting the lower half of screen. Alrighty, so I feel like this is starting to look pretty darn good. We have him extracted pretty nicely. Let's go to the end here, and we'll start to see we're running into some more issues. And this is incredibly, incredibly common when you are replacing a very bright sky background with something that's dark like we are here. And it can be very, very tricky to fix. There's a lot of tinkering that you'll end up needing to do because it's very rarely a one-size-fits-all solution. But I do know of a technique that is pretty good at fixing these edges because it can be very, very tricky. And so in order to do this, we're going to need to split up our roto a little bit more. We have it all in one layer right now. We have our helmet and shoulders, up here, and we also have our legs that are mixed in. So let's start by splitting this up. We want our legs to be separate than our head and shoulders. So now we have just our legs on their own right here. And now that we have that, I think it's fine having them on their own, just like this. We don't need to do anything further. But for our mat right here, for our head and shoulders, what we want to do is split this into a core and an edge, just like we would a key. This is going to give us the most amount of control possible to keep our interior core clean, and then we can use our separated edge node tree to adjust our edges and make it blend nicely with our background. And so what we'll do is we will make this our core. It's always good to label. And then we'll make another pipe over here. And this will be our edge. And we'll just give ourselves a little bit of room. And we'll pipe this in here. All right. So for our core, we already kind of know the drill here. In fact, we've already set this up over here. And let's just paste that. So now we have a core, and the goal here is to not show any of that white that we were seeing compared to when this was off. We're just trying to choke in on this. Maybe this is choked even a little bit too far. Let's go out some. Just don't want to see the white. That's the end goal right here. And we can merge this over our edge. And there's not really any difference yet because we have not treated our edge. So let's just merge this into our little roto section first. Bring this down. And now our head and shoulder roto is reunited with our leg keyer. All right. So let's just kind of talk about what exactly the issue is here, because there's quite a few. Obviously, the big issue is that we have white around our character, and it kind of persists throughout. And why is that? Well, obviously, when we look at this footage, it's because we have a very bright background. And the simple answer, you might think, is just erode in on your mask a little bit. And that could be an answer, but if you kind of look in detail at any one of these areas, you'll see there's a very soft gradation of the dark parts of our character that are falling off into super brights. And it's not necessarily that our roto is off, but rather it's that when we grab these outside pixels, they're so bright, they're kind of overpowering our roto, because we do want to get this very faint dark detail here, but it's so subtle that it gets overpowered by this white background. And so what we need to try to do is get these in-between areas a little bit closer to our background right here. And we're going to take a look at doing that. We want to kind of darken this down so the values are closer to what our end background result will be. So let's go ahead and take a look at doing that. Well, the first thing we can start doing is pretty obvious. We can just start kind of darkening our sky right here. So let's make a keyer. We'll pipe this in, and we just want to isolate the bright parts of our footage. We can do this, crank it down, and try to select our background. Of course, we're not necessarily going to get these. And now we have our background selected, and we can throw in a color correct. Now, something that I see that's very common when trying to darken bright areas is people will gain this down. And the problem with gaining it down is there will be a certain point where your edges start to invert on each other, and it's going to kind of break a little bit. And so what I prefer to do instead of gaining down is actually contrast down. And the reason I prefer to do this is because contrast is going to work towards making everything a middle gray. It's going to bring our brights down and our darkest parts up. Where gain, we're just lowering everything down to 0. So it's much more likely to invert on itself. Let's go ahead and make a duplicate of this color correct so we can compare the results. So let's gain this down to about the same place as our contrast and compare the results between the two. And you can see with our gain color correct, there's a much darker, harsh edge. The decontrast method isn't perfect, but it's definitely better. So now what we can do is just blur this mask out a little bit, soften it up, and then we can change this to alpha. You only want to affect the channels we're actually working with. And we can add an erode right here. Again, we'll change this to just alpha. Every little bit will help speed up our comp. And let's just play with the size a little bit. So we don't need to go too far. And you'll see we've very naturally neutralized our bright background here. So let's see what progress we have made. If we just compare, we can A/B a little bit. And so up here, we've done a really, really good job. In our bright spots, this matches very closely now. If anything, it may be a little bit dark. But this technique doesn't entirely work in super black areas. And it's just because it's so dark here, you'd really have to darken it down. And so now what we want to do is we want to take this fake background that we've added and make our plate sky look a little bit more like it from a brightness standpoint. So what we can do here, we're going to need to use our background. I'm just going to make a no op. When I link things together, I like to have it be very clear. And we're going to say out background. All right, and we can make this a real funky color, like bright pink. And then when we make a postage stamp, we can just link that into our background. We can call this in background, make it the nice funky color, and we'll hide our input. I generally don't recommend hiding your inputs, but if you do, make sure you have some sort of system like this that makes it very clear. So we're just going to reference our background over here. And our end goal is to have this sky colored like our background. And there's a really cool merge operator that can help us with that. And what we want to do here is set this to geometric. And what this is going to do is it's going to kind of blend everything together, but maintain the relative brightness values. It's in a way kind of like a multiply merge, but you'll notice when we use a multiply, everything gets really dark. But a geometric is almost in between an average and a multiply, because if we were to average this, we would lose our dark values. So geometric is just kind of a weird in-between, and it's very helpful for luma keying. And one thing we want to make sure we do, because this geometric is going to change our red, green, blue, and alpha channels, because if we look here, our alpha is gone. And if we turn our geometric off, our alpha is back. So let's just make sure that we really fast add a shuffle, and we will make this alpha full. Great. So let's see what this has done for us. All right, so this is starting to look better and better with each little adjustment. When we turn this off and on, we can see that this looks much closer. It's still not quite there yet, but we're on our way. We can see we're also starting to eat into some of these brighter spots a little bit. We can fix that a little later, because I think all that is we'll just have to adjust our core over top. But for now, we're kind of focusing on getting this dark edge to work. All right, so we're getting closer. If we turn this off, I want to try to identify what parts of our footage are still problematic, because you can see in here, if we turn this on, it looks like our edges are still getting kind of brighter here. Let's look. I just want to make sure that there's no bright spots. It looks like there's not. So we can confirm this brightness is still coming from our edge. And so what we can do, we can kind of tackle this as we need to. We have this really dark spot right here. Let's go ahead and adjust the color of our little geometric right here. So I'm going to do a luma key, and I want to get these dark parts. We'll invert that. Make sure we're just grabbing the mountain right here. All right. And let's throw a color correct on. We'll mask it. And let's just take a look at what this is doing. So when we start to darken this, we can actually darken our edge color. Because remember, that's what we're adjusting here. We're trying to get this nice edge to blend accurately. So let's take a look, see what's going on. So we can see we've actually fixed that pretty darn well, I would say. Let's just turn it off. It's just starting to blend with our background much, much more closely. If anything, we've maybe gone a little bit too dark here. All right, so we can brighten that up. And we're just slowly inching our way closer and closer. And now I feel like we're close enough where we could start to color smear this. So let's throw a little bit of a color smear on here. We want to throw it after our core so we get the original values. Turn this off and on. And let's just start playing with our settings. Restore detail, I normally keep pretty low. We can choke in. As well, we want to use more of our mask. We can see those bright edges just disappear. And let's go into our color smear, make sure that we're kind of feathering this out enough. Turn that off and on. We can use the edge detect, I think, in this. That looks like it's helping. Alrighty. So I think that is doing quite a good job there. We're going to do a final review where we check all of these tiny details later. But let's go ahead and preview this and see how we are looking. And something it looks like I forgot to do here, we have a very harsh mask at the beginning. And we certainly don't want that. Let's make sure that we blur this out right there. We can see we're getting a little bit of alpha down there. I don't want that. Let's move our blur up here. There we go. Alrighty. So I think we're ready for a preview here. And since we're looking at edges, something I do want to do, because remember I said at the beginning of this week, we're going to have our final output be 1080, which is half of this resolution. So I'm just going to scale it down by half. Then if there's any little 2-pixel things, they'll kind of be condensed. This is going to give us a more accurate view of what our final shot will look like. And I also think, you know, while we're in here, wondering if we can do a little black smatch on our background quickly. Now that we kind of know the darkest parts, what color that will be. So I'm going to throw that in there. Select this area right here. All right, and that's just going to make sure that our blacks are consistent. So let's darken our viewer, make this as bright as we can. This is a good way to check what the darkest part of your image is, and just make sure you're sampling an appropriate area. Alrighty. Now our blacks are matched closer. That definitely looks much, much better. And let's go ahead and give this a preview down here. So this is what our shot is looking like right now. It's by no means perfect, but I think we made some really good progress in this video. We'll still need to do some tiny key adjustments here and there, but I think before we move on to doing that, I want to tweak a couple things in our background. I want to get a couple more optical lens effects on there, add some motion blur, and just kind of try to make it creatively a little bit more final before we worry about those tiny technical details. So we'll go ahead and take a look at adjusting our background in our next video. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.